I want to thank People for Profit Solidarity for bringing forward the motion, and also acknowledge the representation that you've given to workers of Debenhams over the last 100 plus days. I think there was a time, if we remember, a couple of months ago, just as the pandemic was hitting us and we realised the extent it was going to be, that we all seemed like we were going to be in this together. All of a sudden we are bringing forward the pandemic unemployment rates that were going to remove people out of poverty. We were enhancing, we were protecting people. And then a couple of weeks after that, we seen that the Debenhams workers were being let go, going into liquidation. And in Dáil Éireann, I watched the representative, who was now the Taoiseach, send these regards, acknowledge the wrongness of it. I watched the Minister for Social Protection highlight how much of an injustice it was. All the parties stood forward, all the parties went out and met the representatives and all talked about how wrong this was and how wrong this seemed to be. And yet all it was tokenism. All it seems to be has just been false gestures of solidarity and false gestures of goodwill, because 100 plus days into it, the Debenhams workers are still out on the picket lines. They're still standing in front of stores 24 hours a day to ensure that stock cannot be removed, because that's the only leverage they have, despite all the mealy-mouthed promises that was contained in there. And the Debenhams workers are, I've listened to it being said that Debenhams is an institution. I've heard in radios Debenhams is an institution. Debenhams is not an institution. Debenhams as a company is not an institution, has no particular relevance to the people of Ireland. However, the Debenhams workers are incredible. They absolutely personify. One of the reasons I think public support is so strong in favour of the Debenhams workers is because how much people associate with them are people who've worked in stores not just for the last 10, 15 years. I've known people who work in Debenhams now who've worked there since the time it was Roach's stores. And what's happening to them is wrong, it's unjust, and what they don't need is promises that action will be taken at some undefined time in the future. They actually need action to be taken now. Minister, this is the second Wednesday in a row where we've come sitting here late in this particular would-be chamber and talked about the issue of workers' rights, and talked about how we can advance and bring forth legislation and protections and stand up for people who've stood up for us, not just throughout this COVID period, but always have, and have always been treated unfairly by this state, who acknowledges their work but never actually wants to pay them enough for it, never wants to protect them legislatively, never wants to acknowledge the difficulties that exist in their life and seek to add the type of protections that would make that a little bit more easier for them. And last week, when we brought forward a motion on workers' rights, what we were met with was similar to this motion today: tokenism, gestures, we'll do something in the future, and then they amend the motions just to take any of the strength out of it, to dilute it, to mean that it has absolutely no essence, to take it away. And then you get to stand forward and say what you are in favour, which actually equates to nothing. So if that's the line that's being drawn here, if that's the line that's going to be drawn in this chamber, where we have groups on the left, predominantly on the left, because there's a forced ideological divide, I think, in this chamber now, and that's absolutely fine. And the divide is going to be who's going to stand up for workers and who isn't. Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to be on the side of the people for whom it would be unconscionable for them to fall asleep in the workplace. I'm going to be on the side of people, of the Debenhams workers, who can't go to sleep because 24 hours a day they're standing outside their store ensuring that stock cannot be removed. I want to be on the side of the 160,000 plus workers in this country who before the pandemic were working and still living in conditions of poverty. I want to be on the side of the people when people stood up in the Dáil Éireann and talked about in Ireland the full employment. They kind of whispered the fact that in that full employment those people that couldn't afford a childcare, who couldn't afford their rent, who were living in positions that were precarious. That's the side that we're going to be on. And if the Green Party, if Fianna Fáil, if Fine Gael want to be on the other side, so be it. Let's have that divide. There is an urgency. There is a massive urgency in relation to protections and workers' rights in this country. Debenhams is not the first by any stretch of the imagination. We've heard reference to all the other, the Vita Cortexes, all the other workers, the Cleary's workers. But all COVID-19 has done is accelerated something that was already going to be happening. I was proud representative of Dublin Central, where Debenhams and Henry Street is, and I also take an interest in business in the inner city because that's where I grew up. And we've all known for a long time that commercial footfall in Dublin Central as a whole was lessening, that people were choosing to drive out to the M50 shopping centres, or even more worse for the employees, they were doing their shopping online. And what's happened here is this tactical insolvency is being used to take advantage of that reality. And if we don't legislate now, if we don't get around the table and do it really quickly, what's happening to Debenhams workers now is going to be happening all along our Henry Street, all along our Grafton Street, and what will again occur is that we'll be in here asking for something to be done, and government parties have never really been on the side of the workers, despite what you might say, will be telling us all the reasons why we can't do anything. Because let's be honest, the only people you're backing there is the powerful, the people, the bigger businesses. So there is an urgency regarding this, and we're asking to act. I mean, the fact that you brought forward an amendment to a motion, it's an awful tactic, let's be fair. You're taking away, tomorrow we're going to vote against something that people put a lot of effort into for no other reason other than that's a kind of smarmy little tactic, and it's to the detriment of our democracy. But what absolutely will not be to the detriment of our democracy is when workers realise they're being taken for a ride by these parties and actually stand up, organise, engage, act and demand their rights. I mean, last week when we brought forward a motion calling for greater protections, we were told at some undefined point we'll get a living wage. Much the same way now, people for profit solidarity are being told that somewhat of the time we'll protect to stop against tactical insolvencies. Well, actually, we don't have that long to wait. Workers, particularly in the real estate sector, were vulnerable before COVID-19. Those same workers who, when we were queuing up outside Tesco's, they were the people who were letting us in, who were manning the tills, who were ensuring that actually the shelves remained stacked, that we could get our food, that our supply lines remained open, and we absolutely need to protect them. It's not going to be good enough. There is a simple ask, and actually something that gives light in whose interests power has served in this country. It's the Dothi Cahill report. It was brought forward 5 years ago when similar statements were made in Dáil Éireann. They went off and they developed the Dothi Cahill report, and 5 years later, despite all the gestures, beside all the similarities in rhetoric that's being given from government now and the government then, nothing's been happening. That's a choice that's being made here tonight. So we can choose. We can choose how we act, we can choose how we respond, we can choose whose interest we're going to serve in now. At a very minimum, let's create and start the legislation by which we can enact the recommendations of the Dothi Cahill report, because what's happening now with Debenhams is what's happened previously with the other stores. What's happening now with Debenhams is going to be accelerated. Other large employers are looking at this case. And when we're seen to be doing nothing, that's the reality that's going to happen in every high street in this country. Good man, good chair.